Yeah, I just signed a big deal with Vince. A big deal. 6 months later, I'm like, yeah, go screw yourself, Vince.
The power struggle between Brock Lesnar and Vince McMahon has always been ruthless behind the scenes, but a newly surfaced heated clip now reveals a side of their feud no one saw coming. And after 20 years of disrespect, broken promises, and silent resentment, the question becomes, did Brock finally cross the line? Because we have the full story and the footage to prove it, so let's break it down from the very beginning, where blood, money, and betrayal hardly capture what just erupted between Brock Lesnar and Vince McMahon, as this raw and explosive clip loaded with decades of unresolved anger has shocked the internet and left fans wondering what exactly is happening between the beast incarnate and the man who turned him into a global star.
Yeah, I just signed a big deal with Vince. A big deal. Like back then, 20 years ago, a lot of guaranteed money. And I'm like, 6 months later, I'm like, yeah, go screw yourself, Vince. He was a little chap.
That single clip has reignited a powder keg, but it is not just the words. It is the tone, the smirk, and the venom behind Brock's delivery, because this is not some old war story. It is a cold confession. 20 years in the making that makes you question what we have really been watching all this time. And we have not even reached the moment when Lesnar hurled a championship belt at Vince McMahon's chest on live television, or the unscripted backstage confrontations that were never supposed to be seen. Because the most shocking part of this interview is not what Brock said, but how Vince responded. So let us rewind to 20 years ago when Brock Lesnar was not just a rising star, but a once-in-a-generation athlete. An absolute phenomenon with NCAA titles, freak genetics, and a glare that could silence a stadium. And Vince McMahon recognized it and locked him down with a massive deal where Brock even admitted he had just signed a huge contract with guaranteed money. But that partnership soured quickly, and within 6 months Brock was done. Not quietly and not respectfully, as he told Vince in his own words to go screw yourself. And what followed was not just a contract falling apart, but the birth of one of the most toxic love-hate relationships in wrestling history. As Lesnar left WWE, tried the NFL and failed, then went to Japan and dominated before returning, but never truly falling back in line, while Vince never forgot or forgave. And behind the scenes, their clashes only grew louder with shouting matches, walkouts, and in one infamous WrestleMania 34 moment where Brock threw the Universal Championship belt at Vince in pure rage.
I just signed a big deal with Vince, a lot of guaranteed money.
Was it scripted? Was it part of the show? The answer is no. Because according to multiple insider reports and eyewitnesses, Brock was furious after the match finish was changed at the very last second. Lesnar wanted to bleed, Vince refused, but Brock did it anyway, which made Vince snap and Brock explode, and that cycle has repeated ever since. Behind the bright lights of sports entertainment lies a harsh, old-school business built on exploitation, manipulation, and control, and no one has played that game longer or dirtier than Vince McMahon, who for decades has pushed his wrestlers to the breaking point both physically and mentally. Through it all, Brock Lesnar has always been his most unpredictable card. Sometimes the golden goose and sometimes the ticking time bomb, but recently the balance has shifted. Because this viral clip is not just a podcast soundbite or a throwaway remark, it is part of a bigger unraveling made of decades of backroom deals, egos, power struggles, and one massive secret that Brock finally let slip when, in that same viral video, he dropped a subtle but devastating line.
Look at the rage on the face, in the eye.
At first, it may sound like respect, but when you hear the full clip and notice the exhaustion in his voice, it feels more like someone trying to explain why they stayed loyal to a man who controlled them for years. And that brings us to control, because WWE is an empire built on it. Control of storylines, control of the narrative, and most disturbing of all, control over people emotionally, financially, and even physically. This is not an exaggeration, because Vince McMahon is not just a demanding boss. He is also facing a lawsuit filled with shocking allegations of sexual abuse, trafficking, and decades of psychological manipulation as revealed in a major expose. And in 2024, he became the subject of a disturbing legal case where a woman named Janelle Grant claimed she was pressured into a relationship with Vince as a condition of her job at WWE. The lawsuit described a chilling pattern of abuse, including being locked in a private room by Vince, receiving texts implying he owned her body, and even being trafficked to other WWE executives, with one of the most horrific claims stating that she was told she would scream even if she tried to resist and try to resist, but that it would be nearly impossible to say anything at all. It was a chilling example of coercion and control at its worst. And yet, even after those revelations came to light, Vince was still showing up on Wall Street signing multi-billion-dollar deals. Proving this is not just about two men clashing in a locker room, but about the rotten foundation of how WWE has treated its stars, using them, discarding them, and passing it all off as entertainment. Because even someone like Lesnar, with all his power and wealth, was still just another cog in the machine. But unlike so many others, he is no longer afraid to fight back. And one reminder of that came on Raw in January 2013 when Brock stormed the ring during Paul Heyman's performance review and dropped Vince with an F5, a moment that at the time everyone believed was just part of the script.
Honestly, my relationship with Vince is so different than it is with Dana over the years. Vince and I have had a love-hate relationship for, the last 20 years, but it's been good. We've got a lot of water under the bridge. I have a lot of respect for both men. I met Vince when I was younger. I look at Vince more as a father figure, actually, because I've learned a lot of things from him.
According to several backstage insiders, Vince had no idea how far Brock would take it. And that attack left him legitimately injured to the point where he required hip surgery. Yet the company spun it into a storyline because that is what WWE has always done best, turning real pain into ratings. For Brock Lesnar, the line between reality and performance has always been razor thin, because what you just saw was not entertainment, but raw, uncontrolled rage erupting on live television, disguised as part of the show, but far too violent and personal to ever be fully scripted. The truth is, Brock has always been WWE's nuclear option. The ace Vince McMahon pulled out whenever ratings slipped or credibility wavered. But nuclear weapons never stay silent. They hum, they pulse, and they threaten to explode. And now with the release of this footage in Brock's own words, it is clear he has finished being controlled, and we cannot forget that Vince once called Brock a monster, not in the playful wrestling sense, but in the most literal way possible.
It is! It's the beast! Brock Lesnar! What is he doing here?
What kind of boss says something like that to his own employee? And more importantly, what kind of man creates a monster only to act shocked when that monster finally turns on him? Because that is exactly what happened at WrestleMania 34, after Brock headlined in what many called one of the dullest and most uninspired title matches ever, and backstage, he made it clear he was done. According to reports from Wrestling Observer, the moment Brock walked through the curtain, he hurled the Universal Championship straight at Vince McMahon's chest, shouted in his face, and stormed off before even getting paid. While WWE tried to pass it off as scripted, insiders revealed that Vince was furious, and the two nearly came to blows. Think about that. Because even as Vince faced accusations of some of the darkest behavior imaginable, he was still smiling for cameras on the red carpet at the New York Stock Exchange, and yet Brock Lesnar was the one labeled the monster. But maybe he is finally breaking free from the monster's grip, and there is something almost poetic about Brock being the one to throw it all back at Vince. Because unlike most of Vince's creations, Brock never needed a script. He had the skill, the discipline, and the fighting background to succeed on his own, proving it by dominating the UFC, breaking records, and building a brand outside of WWE, so when he returned, it was not out of desperation, but pure leverage.
You know who you are to me? Who you are to you? You're a monster!
That line becomes chilling when you think about it, because the lessons Brock carried over were simple. That control means power, that loyalty never lasts, and that in this business, you do not make friends, you make leverage. By mastering those rules, Brock became the one thing Vince feared most: independent. And that is exactly why their relationship eventually tore apart. But here's where the story takes another twist, because after the viral footage spread, fans uncovered yet another confrontation, this time involving Triple H, Vince's real-life son-in-law and heir to WWE's creative empire. And when Brock went after Vince again in 2015, it was Triple H who stepped in, sparking a real-life brawl that left Lesnar bleeding, and WWE officials scrambling to calm the chaos.
Look at Vince more as a father figure, actually, because I've learned a lot of things from him, and I was able to carry those things over and handle business with Dana.
That was not just a storyline. It was family business, playing out in front of millions, and Lesnar did not back down, because even after his head smashed against the steel post and blood poured down his face, he kept going. He wanted Vince, and nothing, not even Triple H, was going to stop him. But the real question is, what drove him to that point? Here is where the story blows wide open. Because this was not a one-time incident, but a cycle of violence, betrayal, and public spectacle, where every time Brock grew too big to control, he walked away. In 2004, in 2005, in 2006, and again in 2023, and with each exit, the fallout only grew more explosive. So let us rewind back to 2015.
Yeah, I just signed a big deal with Vince. A big deal. Like back then, 20 years ago, a lot of guaranteed money. And I'm like, 6 months later, I'm like, yeah, go screw yourself, Vince. He was a little chap.
Lesnar's return was heavily promoted, but behind the curtain he was furious, with reports claiming he nearly refused to walk out after a last-minute script change. When he finally did step through the curtain, the tension was unmistakable. Cameras caught it, fans felt it, and then came the night when he nearly went after Stephanie.
Triple H coming to the aid of his father-in-law. Triple H coming to get him some retribution.
Stephanie McMahon, Vince's daughter, confronted him backstage and tried to stop him from heading to the ring. But instead of backing down, he grabbed a steel chair. And although the cameras cut away quickly, that was not just for pacing, it was for liability control. And then there is Triple H, the only man who has tried again and again to keep Lesnar contained and failed every single time.
You think that's funny? You think I can't do it right now? That's the beast incarnate.
That was not kayfabe blood, and it was not a prop table. It was real heat, real injuries, and real people getting hurt while trying to stop one man from exploding. And the man who lit that fire inside him was Vince McMahon. That makes it not only complicated, but chilling. Because when a father figure teaches you to bleed for ratings, to turn pain into performance, and to break people for the sake of the crowd, you do not walk away whole, you walk away broken, angry, and controlled until the day you finally fight back. And that is exactly what is happening now, because WWE has always thrived on one rule: control the story. But Brock Lesnar was the one man they never truly controlled. And when power like that slips out of Vince McMahon's grip, things begin to shatter. Brock was never like the others. He was not desperate for fame. He was not a lifelong loyalist like Cena, and he was not a company man like Orton. He was a mercenary. And he proved it in the years after his first WWE exit. Now, Brock Lesnar is exposing Vince McMahon's lies because in the end, they say monsters do not fear other monsters. But what happens when the monster you created turns back on you in front of the world? Because only weeks after Brock Lesnar's viral comments about Vince McMahon surfaced, something shocking happened that left the WWE locker room in silence, as not the veterans, not the producers, not even the camera crew knew how to react when a leaked backstage clip recorded by a staff member who should not have been filming showed Lesnar in raw, unfiltered mode pacing, furious, and delivering a line that could go down as the most damaging quote of his career. And while we will reveal that exact line in a moment, first, we need to set the stage for what caused this eruption, because it was the result of a chain of events inside a backstage atmosphere so toxic and broken that even WWE's own inner circle started leaking from within. And that entire chain was triggered by Brock's subtle jab at Vince in that viral short. Make no mistake, that was not affection, it was resignation. The words of a survivor explaining what it feels like to be manipulated by the man who controls your name, your image, and your legacy. And shortly after that podcast went viral, WWE's PR team scrambled, but Brock did not step back, and he did not apologize, because instead he stood firm, and in a leaked hot mic moment recorded off stage at a house show, he was heard telling a crew member that Vince made billions off him, but still acted like Brock owed him something, and that he did not owe Vince anything. And even though the audio was short, low quality, and grainy, it was clearly Brock's voice. And once it began spreading across Reddit and wrestling forums, WWE tried to erase it, but the damage was already done as the story shifted. And soon after, everything spiraled because Brock's fight was no longer just with Vince, but with the entire WWE corporate machine, from the handlers to the yes men to the so-called talent relations team that had failed to control him for decades. Reports from Fightful Select and Wrestling. Observer revealed that tensions exploded in a closed-door production meeting where Lesnar allegedly stormed out and slammed a table after finding out his WrestleMania script had been changed without his approval, as Brock, who is famously private and very selective about his appearances, had agreed to a post-main event segment with Cody Rhodes, only to learn it had been scrapped in favor of a surprise return by a part-time legend. Lesnar's reaction was explosive as one insider told Wrestling Inc. that Brock did not just walk away quietly, but lost it backstage and told creative to stop treating him like a prop. Yet, what came afterward is what truly shocked the internet, because only days later, Stephanie McMahon, who had been absent from WWE media for months, broke her silence in a now-deleted Instagram comment where, after a fan asked about Brock's podcast appearance, she allegedly wrote that there are always two sides to every story, and that her father's version is not always the truth. And although the comment vanished in less than 10 minutes, it cracked open a door to WWE had spent years trying to keep locked. The door where Vince McMahon's authority was no longer untouchable. But to be clear, the warning signs had always been there, from the night Brock ambushed Vince live on Raw, to the way Vince smirked through bruised ribs and brushed it off as nothing more than good television.
Vince and I have had a love-hate relationship for, the last 20 years. I look at Vince more as a father figure.
Insiders claimed that after that segment, Vince privately vowed never to fully trust Lesnar again, and even told a top executive that Brock was a loaded gun with no safety. Yet despite that, he kept bringing him back because Brock Lesnar makes money. He sells out arenas, he boosts ratings, and he brings the kind of authenticity WWE desperately lacks. And Vince, who is power-hungry, scandal-stained, and aging fast, cannot afford to let go of the beast. But here's the twist, because Brock does not want their money anymore. He wants control, and if he cannot have that, he is ready to burn the whole house down one live mic, one ruined segment, and one backstage leak at a time. And the most shocking moment of all came during a now infamous confrontation right before a SmackDown taping, when Lesnar reportedly went after Bruce Pritchard, one of Vince's longest-serving right-hand men, over how his return match was being booked. And eyewitnesses say Brock slammed a monitor, declared that he does not work for liars, and stormed out of gorilla position just minutes before the show was about to go live. And in Vince's world, that would usually mean termination. But not for Brock, because Vince knows that without Lesnar, WWE loses its last real monster, and that is the paradox, because Vince built Brock to be the monster who could destroy his enemies, but now that same monster has turned on him. The Vince McMahon scandal that WWE could not bury is where everything shifts, because by now the leaked footage has spread across the internet, the podcast quotes have been dissected, the backstage outbursts have been confirmed, and even Stephanie's deleted comment has been screenshot and archived. But there is still one final piece of the puzzle that ties it all together in the most disturbing way. And that is the question of whether Brock Lesnar knew about Vince McMahon's sexual misconduct scandal long before the public ever did, and if that knowledge is what fueled the explosion between them. So let us rewind to 2019 when Janelle Grant, a WWE employee, was allegedly coerced into a secret sexual relationship with Vince, which according to a lawsuit filed in 2024 was abusive and controlling, and included being trafficked to other executives like John Laurinaitis, with claims that Vince told her he owned her and threatened her job if she resisted. But the part that cannot be overlooked is that according to two former WWE employees who spoke anonymously to WrestleNomics, Brock Lesnar was part of a small circle of top talent who had already heard rumors of Vince's misconduct as early as 2020. Sources claimed Lesnar grew uneasy with Vince's behavior toward certain female staff and often refused to attend promotional events where Vince was present. And one producer even recalled Brock saying there are things he would never ignore, not even for Vince. And when that concern mixed with his growing frustration over how his character was being used, the tension finally exploded in 2023 in a clash that was about more than storylines or money. It was about morals. Then came the promo, when on an episode of Raw after WrestleMania, Vince reportedly told Cody Rhodes to take a subtle jab at Lesnar's loyalty by saying that some people are only here for a paycheck, and some only show up when things are easy. And what happened next stunned fans, because as Rhodes delivered the line, Brock, who was already in the ring for a stare-down, suddenly froze, broke eye contact, stared straight into the hard cam, and for a few seconds looked heartbroken with no rage and no smirk and no fire in his eyes. Only pain, because this was no longer about a storyline, it was about betrayal. And insiders later revealed that Lesnar had not approved the line and had even asked that nothing personal be mentioned, but Vince ordered it anyway. And that may have been the final straw, because days later Lesnar quietly stripped all WWE branding from his website. His team canceled interviews and fans began noticing something chilling. Brock Lesnar was erasing WWE from his identity. A man who once proudly wore the company's logo on his gloves now stepped into the ring with nothing but plain black tape. And the man who once called Vince a father figure now reduced him to just the guy who writes the checks. And in one final untelevised segment caught on a fan's video that went viral across TikTok and Instagram, Brock Lesnar looked straight into the crowd during a match and said, "You think he cares about you? He does not even care about his own blood." And while the crowd reacted thinking it was just heat, longtime fans knew that was not the character speaking, that was the man. And then, just like that, he was gone, as Lesnar was pulled from promotional material and his name erased from future house show cards with no official statement given. Only silence. But behind the scenes there was panic, because Vince may have made billions off Brock Lesnar, but the one thing he could not buy was silence. And now with federal investigations, corporate lawsuits, and public scrutiny closing, and the last thing WWE can risk is a man like Brock going off script, because this time it is not a storyline, it is not a match, it is war. So what happens now? Here is what we know. Brock Lesnar is in no rush to return to WWE, despite being one of its biggest draws, as sources close to him say he is stepping back, weighing his options and watching the chaos from a distance, while insiders suggest he may not come back unless Vince McMahon is finally forced out for good after everything that has surfaced, from the lawsuits to the backlash to the power struggle. And meanwhile, Stephanie McMahon, who has stayed mostly silent, is rumored to be considering a return to stabilize the company and take control as her father's legacy collapses. And Vince still denies any wrongdoing, still attends billion-dollar meetings, and still acts like the empire is not cracking beneath him. But the truth is clear. The monster he created has turned on him, and the damage is already done because the footage is out and the words are recorded, and the fans see it for what it is. Because not everything can be spun into storyline, and not everything can be hidden under kayfabe. And this is one of those rare moments where the mask slips and WWE is exposed for what it really is, a machine built on loyalty until loyalty becomes inconvenient. The final thought is that Brock Lesnar was never just a wrestler, he was a symbol, a force, and a test, and Vince McMahon failed that test. Because when you create a monster to make you rich, you'd better be ready for the day that monster starts asking real questions. The kind that cannot be answered with a promo, the kind that end careers, and for Vince McMahon that moment may have finally arrived. So click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this.